What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning into the Local Crown podcast, where we're going to teach you how to wage war on your competition and earn your local crown, also known as the top spot on Google. Today I'm coming at you with my man Dan Nicholson. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do for the people who don't know you, man?
Well, I guess in terms of who I am is that cliche kid that everyone knew growing up scheming on business ideas. That's sort of my start. So always been an entrepreneur. Took a detour for a while. Got an accounting degree and an information systems degree, thinking, okay, technology and accounting, language of business would be the best skill set to sort of continue my career as an entrepreneur. And then I ended up getting nominated for a fellowship with the board that writes all the accounting standards in the US. And so that put me on a whole different track. It sort of would be the equivalent of if you graduated law school and you clerked for the Supreme Court. It's probably the best sort of comparison. And so that put me on a weird track. I worked on this derivatives and hedge accounting standard, which I won't bore the listeners with all the details of that. Basically, helping billionaires make more billions. If you've heard of hedge funds, it's basically kind of what I was doing. And so put me on this weird track as the so-called derivatives expert. And then I woke up one day with a little bit of a quarter life crisis of, what am I doing? I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm working on this complex accounting standard and these complex financial instruments. And first person in my family to go to college, so I was a little bit kind of conflicted by what I should be doing versus what I wanted to be doing.
Yeah.
And my parents made a bunch of sacrifices for me to go off to college. And here I am making more than they ever have and kind of feeling almost ungrateful for it, And so moved around for a little bit. And then I realized about 10 years ago that there was an opportunity to do something different in the accounting space, basically disrupt what happens there, which most accountants are basically archaeologists digging up the past. And I realized, what if we just did the opposite of that? And so that led me to where I am now, which is basically after 3,000 plus unique conversations with entrepreneurs and high net worth folks, that really what I do is develop strategies and technologies to help people achieve financial certainty, which is what I think people really want. Like, you want more sales, or you want to pay less in tax, because you want more certainty about getting closer to whatever is important to you. So that's what I really do now. And that's what's kind of keeps me going.
Awesome, man. So you mentioned that most accountants are kind of like archaeologists digging up the past, and that you're trying to do the opposite. Can you give me a little bit more information on what you mean by that?
Yeah. So I have 4 commandments. I call them the 4 commandments of wealth. 4 commandments of financial certainty, and they're basically the things that kind of guide me, that I always go back to, and then I use 12 principles that I developed to kind of evaluate situations to come up with kind of the right answer. And one of the main commandments is every action we take needs to get us closer to the things that we want, which seems basic, but a lot of us are getting further and further away. And so what I realized was most accountants are not helping their clients get closer to the things that they want. They're just transactional. And the reason why they're not helping them get closer is because when they say this year, they mean last year. And so they're really just they're looking at the past. And so what do we do about that? Well, one of my principles is, whenever the answer is not readily apparent, just do the opposite. It's called inversion, I think is the technical term for it. And so if every archaeologist or every CPA is an archaeologist and they're not actually helping their clients get closer to what they want, what would be the opposite of being an archaeologist if I'm trying to solve the problem of helping someone get closer? And so the opposite would be, rather than digging up the past, what if I could be, instead of an archaeologist, a futurist? Well, what would that mean? And how would I actually do that for clients? And so that is sort of the, I guess, mechanics of how I got to that and why I do that.
Awesome, man. So what exactly is financial certainty and like why is that so important to you?
Yeah, good question. A couple of years ago, I heard this quote from this guy, Chip Conley, and he said, anxiety equals uncertainty times powerlessness. It's like, man, that kind of hit me in the face or punch to the gut of, yeah, that's so true that uncertainty and powerless, the sense of lacking power, it's a multiplication. They amplify each other. It's not a plus. It's a multiply. And when I heard that, sort of solved the problem that I had been festering on for a while about how every client, whether they're the startup or they're the really rich client, and I've worked with everyone in between, the same question they would ask me, which is basically, am I going to be okay? Am I going to run out of money? And so underneath that is anxiety, basically.
Yeah.
It's hard to relate to how could the person with hundreds of millions or billions of dollars be wondering if they're going to be okay. Well, it's sort of that more money, more problems, whereas they make more, they take on more and more responsibilities and liabilities and properties, and they're taking care of family members and all this sort of stuff that their cost of living goes up. And no one wants to go back, take a step back. So they want to make sure they stay at least in their current position. So everybody has sort of this anxiety that they were coming to me with about, am I going to be okay? And that equation just struck me of, okay, if I just took anxiety equals uncertainty times powerlessness, and I just dropped in financial, that's really what clients want. So financial anxiety equals financial uncertainty times financial powerlessness. And so ultimately what I do is give them more certainty around their finances and more power so that they don't have anxiety. So I'm answering the question of basically, am I going to be okay? Am I going to run out of money?
Awesome. So what are a few things that a small business can do to start achieving that kind of certainty?
Yeah, step one, every action needs to get us closer to the things that we want. So we have to define what it is that we actually want. I call that profit priorities. I built a tool for it. It's called the Certainty app that helps you build all this out. But step one is define your core priorities, the things everybody has. Everybody wants to pay off debt, fund a certain amount of reserves, fund retirement. So we all have those priorities. And then we have our own unique versions of priorities. I call those preference-based. Things like I have two young kids, paying for their college, paying for their weddings, buying a vacation property. Those are things I don't have to have, but they're things that I want. And so the combination of my core priorities, the things everyone has, plus the preference-based priorities, that's my unique definition of wealth. That's what I'm trying to get closer to. And so if you can list those out, assign a dollar value to it, how much does it cost to do each one of those, and put a date to it, then we can actually calculate how much more money you need to make. So part of what my app does, the Certainty app, is allow someone to define all those priorities, sync in their assets and liabilities, and then it calculates how much more they need to make sure they can fund all of those priorities. And so the point of that is that once you know how much more you actually need to make, the path becomes so much more clear, because we assume that more is always the answer, that we just need to keep making more and more and more, but we don't know how much more. So if someone does anything from this sort of conversation would be define those profit priorities. What are they? How much do you need? What is the date? And then calculate how much cash you actually need to make. Because oftentimes, if once you know that number, we can find it in what you're already doing. You know, we can, things like you do, where you already have assets. You're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. You already have these assets. If you really just need to make $5,000 or $10,000 more per month, and you hit all your priorities, you wouldn't need to do these 10 other things that you're trying. I'm just making up an example, but it's that lack of clarity on how much you actually need that causes people to take on a lot of unnecessary risks.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you learned something. If you have questions, email us at info@thelocalcrown.com. And if you want to get featured in our publication, Inside the Empire, alongside John Lee Dumas, the entrepreneur on fire, Jayson Waller, the CEO of Power Home Solar, Sharon Lechter, Dan Caldwell, the man that started Tap Out, and the limitless man himself, Jim Kwik, for free, then head over to thelocalcrown.com/become a contributor.